want you to know that by reading more Old Testament, I've been slowing down instead of going, oh my gosh, this is just stuff we know a lot of, and oh my gosh, this is just a lot of names and what have you. I'll just zip through this. You have caused me, even with Chronicles, to slow down and to understand what this is, why this is where it is,
Yeah.
why it's being used. So I appreciate that.
I sure have gained a new appreciation um for genealogies, that's for darn sure.
I have got to get out of the stick, and I know I probably have another relative. I know I probably have someone who fought in 1860 in the Civil War, and I'm Beth is my genealogist. She's the one that sits there through things, but
And how important it is that
we know our families.
so well, we at least acknowledge. I mean, we went out on Saturday for the No Kings protest, and my sister made a sign that said, "I am." Let's see, my how did she put it? I am the descendant of immigrants. And then she made a flag of each one of those places from which we are descended. And I thought, yeah, it is really important in all sorts and kinds of ways that we know from whence we came, because how do we know where we're going?
And I will say, and then I will shut up about this. My family, because of World War I and II, focused on the British side of the family rather than the German side, which is where we get our Revolutionary War ancestors from. Because of the acts of the World War II, they did not want to accept.
Yeah.
They wanted to be more British than German.
Yeah, and that was pretty ordinary.
And it was kind of interesting because the poor folks got.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, back to Genesis.
So do we have any loose ends to pick up from where we were last week? Jane, Simon?
Before you go on to that, maybe you're not aware of it. There is a World War II museum that has started in New Orleans.
Yeah, been there.
Yes.
And my son is there at this time. My dad is being honored because he was on call as a munitions expert all of his life, which I never knew until he died. And I went through his wallet and there was a card there.
Yep. That's something. That's an amazing museum if you ever get to New Orleans.
Yep.
We could have spent days. We didn't even get to the Pacific Theater. Days. You could spend days in there. Okay, so what do we need to pick up as we move ahead?
Page 39, page 41, I got at the end.
Anything that
with page 45
that we need to except to reiterate his statement that the Adam story is a story of Israel in miniature, a preview of coming attractions.
And that was one question that I had. Is that, looking at the story of Genesis as the story of Israel in miniature, is that how Genesis is seen now in scholarly work? And I've never heard that before.
Right. Yeah. And the other piece that Peter Enns and Jared Bias have written it that the time period in which Genesis was written, and how important that is in how we understand Genesis. And I mean, these guys are very contemporary scholars. And we know that scholarship changes over time, or how yes, I guess that's the statement I want to say, that scholarship changes. So Catherine, I think it's important for us to sort of put it in our quiver of what we know and understand about scholarship. I also think that it's okay for us to make a choice about the scholarship that we want to sort of carry on with us. And it's okay to leave some behind that no longer serves. And I think that that's what he really was teaching us when we were reading his other book, about wisdom.
Kathy, are you meaning that we have a choice to choose between the viewpoints?
Yeah.
I think that, well, I think that we need yes, I think that's what I'm saying, but we also have a responsibility to sort of to align ourselves with the ones that makes that, I don't know, is not just make sense, but seem to have a cogent and well-researched argument. Sharon?
And the ones that draw us closer to God,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
not push us away.
Yeah, I think that's a good part too. Because I've been, doing so much work again on Revelation, and because of the news of war, I went back to Barbara Rossing's explanations of so she has a huge chapter in her book, The Rapture Exposed, called The Rapture Script for the Middle East. And I have said, read this because it's so good. Now, the reason I say that is because I trust Barbara Rossing as a scholar, right? I do not trust LaHaye as a scholar. I do not trust Lindsay as a scholar. I do not trust Darby as a scholar. So, Jane, I don't think all of them are equal by any means.
It's
And
a choice of what to believe, in other words.
no, what scholarship wise, we always have to have a robust relationship with scripture, right?
Yeah.
And to understand that just about every single time we come back to scripture, to the same place, we see with new eyes and new ears, because we ourselves are in a different place. And I think that that's also a really important piece to same. It doesn't. We talked about that whole appropriation thing the last time. It doesn't land on us the same way all the time. And in fact, for a document that we believe is alive and well, it shouldn't land on us the same way every single time, because we're in a whole new place. And I think that's what's happening for us here with Genesis, is that Peter Enns and Jared Byas are giving us a new set of lenses. And that's great. That's fun and interesting and wonderful, and helping us to think about this story that we think we know so incredibly well, in some new ways. And in some ways that are challenging. Here he says on page 30, just before we get into chapter 4, stories are not waiting to be molded to fit our experience. They are waiting for us to take the risk of entering their world of story and to be changed by it. So I think that's where we are. And I trust Peter Enns until he does something that does or says something that's absolutely off the wall or crazy. I will continue to trust him. And he is one who I would love to sit and learn from.
You would love to sit and do what?
Learn from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would just sit in his presence.
He'd keep you
How old is
laughing.
this guy anyway?
Who is he?
How old is he?
He's my
In
age.
his early 60s, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Well, we could
Maybe you could do a summer thing with him in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, be fun.
we could invite him to one of our Bible studies.
Sure.
Zoom, you know, with all
The worst he
fun.
could say is no.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we could tell him how much we love him, he might come. I bet people do that all the time.
But there was somewhere in here in chapter 6 where he mentioned that looking at this as a miniature of the arc of Israel's life makes us so, we're used to reading, okay, this is the story of Adam and Eve. This is the story of the flood. This is the story of Joseph and the amazing coat. We see them as separate stories, not as all linked together.
Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of used to seeing these stories, thinking about them on a flannel board.
Yeah.
So, so I just feel like I need to do so much growing up, to really listen to these as stories for other grown-ups with sophisticated literary techniques and nuanced references to metaphors elsewhere, and say this is another retelling of that same story. It's so easy to not see that because that never comes out when you're telling it to the kids with the flannel board.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Which is why, I get so sad that adult people don't continue with Bible study, right? Because
Yeah.
we can't, I mean, that's why, I don't know. I think that's why we have such a truncated faith. We stopped when we stopped listening to stories told to us, and that's all we know. And that served us well for some time, but it doesn't serve us well anymore, especially at this time in our, in these days when the sort of a dislocated biblical narrative is at the core of whether or not we go to war, right? So I mean, we need to know these things. At least on some level, we need to be aware of where narratives come from and why we're so attached or not attached to those particular narratives. And the challenge is there. On the very beginning here of chapter 5, right? Isn't that where we were thinking we'd start? So I have to keep reminding myself of what Peter is saying here, that Kathy, this is a story that is an encapsulation of the story of Israel. And that story moves. Those are some of the things that we've been talking about and learning about. And I got all stopped up on this story of Cain and Abel and why God would not accept one sacrifice the other sacrifice, and that what Enns does explain that to me on page 44. He says that Cain does not offer specifically the first fruits of the harvest, just a plain old offering of fruit. And then I say, well, is that enough to, for murder?
Yeah.
Right? And then all those questions come up for me. Is this, it does look to me like this is a God of transaction. Now, God who says, if you do this, then I'll do that. And I want so desperately not to have that happen. So what do I personally do with that? In my world of Bible study and belief, what do I do to reconcile this? And what I do is to look at what the New Testament story of repentance and reconciliation, redemption, and resurrection have to say. And yet, as Sharon constantly reminds us, this is a story about a people for whom that doesn't happen. So did God change? Avis?
I think that we have definitely seen examples like, where God goes from being, a local deity, one of many, part of a court full of deities, when they're talking about Job, and then gradually, then God becomes the best God, and then eventually becomes the only God. And you could read a lot of this as sort of a storyline, as sort of developing ideas about God, that some of this reflects more the human perspective than who God really is. And so I think the beauty of the scripture is sort of the developing of those ideas, but we shouldn't expect them to be expressed, perfectly in every passage.
That's a good reminder, because I think that that's absolutely true. And Enns does continually remind us about that this is about a people
Yeah.
who are coming to terms with a God who constantly acts in their lives to give them the opportunity to acknowledge
Yeah.
this God
And
as
some of the
God.
drama is as we go from one passage to another, you can't just read one passage and expect that one passage to give you the whole story.
That is right.
I find it interesting on 44, and I like what you said, Avis. On the bottom paragraph, well, just before the bottom paragraph, and I'm learning from this, it says, we saw in the last chapter, Adam's story mirrors Proverbs, so does the Cain story. That they're not to give in to sin. And in the paragraph above that on page 44, I like where God says sin is lurking at the door. Its desires to have you, but you must master it. Now I'm going, did I read that? But that God does speak to Cain and warn him, but like Adam and Eve, he kind of just doesn't pay attention. But I thought that was interesting, the way that it's, that he's relating it to Proverbs.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that goes to his whole argument that all of this stuff is related. Again, we can't, we've seen this stuff up on the flannel board and think it's individual stories, and it's not. Jane Korsberg.
I had a question in reading these verses or these chapters. Cain and Abel are bringing a sacrifice, they're bringing a gift, but do we see a mention of God asking them to do that before that event?
No, I don't see it either.
I think that's one of those spots where the reader, or the ancient reader at any rate, knows that already. So again, this is so much less an instruction book than it is, a story about a people who already know something about first fruits.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
so
what
it
they
was
did at
already
the temple.
I'm sorry, let's go with Sharon and then Avis.
That's what they did at the temple. And there's no place to do that in Babylon.
Okay. Yeah, there's no temple, so there's no sacrifice. There's no place to do it. Avis.
I was just I guess I'm repeating what others said, that was just a normal thing for people to give sacrifices in the temple or whatever, and for them to know about first fruits. So the reader would, the original reader, listener would presume that Cain and Abel knew to give sacrifices and how to give them properly. And you could say that it's about obedience and the whys and wherefores of exactly why they're supposed to bring this kind of gift versus that kind of gift. I don't know that ever really got explained really explicitly. It was just sort of laid down pretty clearly. This is what God wants, and maybe the priestly caste was involved in writing this section of Genesis, and so it's sort of about the importance of the priestly rules, and I think that the point is well taken, that we should do what God commands us to do. Even if we're not, even if how can I say this? I mean, it seems like this is sort of trivial about to us now in 2025, not coming from this background. It seems a little like some kind of paperwork detail for it to have to be first fruits instead of any fruits. But I think that the central point is not about that. The central point is that we should follow God's commandments.
Yeah.
Right.
With faithfulness.
Yeah, that's it. That's right.
And as another trivial detail about that is, the placement of this story in the story, because, if we wanted to, we could say, well, Cain, what would they know about first fruits anyway? They're the first people, right, on the earth. So they're,
Yeah, I was thinking of there is no priestly caste. Yeah.
well, except if that's how it was written. So that's the thing that gets, we have to keep, I mean, it is a little like time travel.
Mhm.
We have to keep reminding ourselves that it's a story written way over here about something that looks like it happened way over here. Yeah, I think that's why time travel is important. Go ahead, Avis.
I also think, well, now that I'm thinking about it, is we Episcopalians also have a lot of rules about how worship is, liturgical rules about how worship is supposed to be conducted. And if you don't do it that way, it just feels wrong.
Yes,
Like I can remember
yes.
attending a Methodist church and they had a potluck on Ash Wednesday, and I just felt, oh my goodness, that's just wrong.
Me too, Avis.
Could it be?
I played in the Methodist church for 14, 15 years, and I would often talk with the pastor about liturgy, and why don't you say the creed, and
Yeah.
or other churches that I've played in. We had a Lutheran pastor who decided to get creative at St. Mark's for a while. He was not favored, and everybody was going. Daniel was going, why can't he just use page 5 in the book?
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying. It doesn't feel the same.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Mm-hmm. So on page 46, I think he does a pretty good job of helping us out here. Remember, he says, Genesis 2-4 is not a story of the ultimate origin of everything. It's clear this writer has and so I mean I think through study we do know that this might be the priestly writer, that this writer has an agenda to tell the story of Israel's relationship with God, with no space to waste on other matters, like what other people were doing at the time. Cain and his line are a train wreck. They exemplify what happens to a people who are cut off from God. The family tree of Israel does not include Cain's family. But then who? Abel is dead. And so then we learn about Seth. And that whole line through which we come to Noah. So that's that's just fascinating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he does a nice genealogy there. He's got Cain and Enoch, though. Oh, that's right. Cain does live. It's Abel that gets, okay.
Yeah.
I like this other one, this little bit in italicized. It says, And who were the daughters? The daughter, that gets left totally off.
Totally. Well, and when we read the genealogy, again, I went and read it, yay. And every single one of them the form is the same. And we see like when Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. Seth lived after the birth of Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And then Enosh had other sons and daughters.
Mhm.
Enan had other sons and daughters.
Yeah.
And so, I suppose we could always go down rabbit holes wondering about those other sons and daughters, but we also know that on the ark, the women were not invited, which was quite an odd sort of telling that story. That if you're bringing two of every species on to the boat, but there is no express invitation for Noah's sons to bring their wives.
Yeah, that's right. But did it assume?
I
and
don't
that's the
know.
rabbit
What, can you assume
hole.
that?
Because in order to repopulate the earth, you assume that they were. Yeah, I like the fact on the bottom of page 47, the last sentence, it says, biblical genealogies remind Israel they are part of the family tree, whose roots are planted in a relationship with their creator and redeemer.
Yeah.
And that's then he says major elements of the Genesis that connect with the present,
Yeah.
past, present.
I like his side note right there too. That lasted begins. The clearest example of this, if you want to flip there, is the genealogy in the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles. Talk about a snooze, but this genealogy was a big deal. It was written long after the Israelites returned from exile, when people were fretting over where they stood as a people with God. Those 9 chapters of names, and with the returnees from exile, and it all begins with Adam in First Chronicles 1:1. This genealogy is saying we are still the people of God, just like we have always been from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew that's what genealogies were trying to tell us?
Well, yeah. And that's why I've been slowing down and reading Chronicles. It finally hit me that yes, this is important to relate. The concept of relationship
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what,
Yeah. And on some level, we've forgotten all of that. Some of us, who pay attention to our genealogy and our heritage, and we have the capacity to do that. But from the time I was a little girl and I went to family reunions, I sat at the feet of my elders listening to the family story. And I try hard. It's part of why I brought my boys to Norway when we had a chance to go on sabbatical, was so that they could see the roots of their family there and try and help them see that. And they did. And part of that too is because of the years they spent in Indian country. And that the land is where you find your roots. And, so they did understand when they stood on the farm of those who farmed on that land before us, that they were related to them through that land and through those roots. Sharon, you're going to say something?
Well, and I think, to bring this into more contemporary times, my family and my mother and father were the first generation born here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but would never, I don't think, say that Lithuania or Belarus were their the land that they were from.
Mm-hmm. Why is that different, do you think? Is it
Because
how we tell the story?
I think it's different because the land of Israel is the land you're from.
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it may be way back thousands and thousands of years, but that's the land that God brought you forth from.
You know, so there in the midst of that, of what I said and what Sharon says, is this difference of the only word I know to use right this second, and it might be wrong, is religion. That my family does not tell a story of religion. My family tells a story of ethnicity, heritage, um, uh, and I really don't quite have the words that I want. Sharon's family tells a story of, word isn't religion. What is the word?
Well,
I'm not sure because your family belonged on that land.
Okay.
My family was never allowed to.
Okay.
My family did not belong to the land in the Pale of Settlement. My family did not belong to the land in Lithuania, no matter how many generations they may or may not have lived there.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you see how strong that is to Israel? How I mean, I don't think it can be illustrated more profoundly than in these two stories. And that I think that we we rarely have the chance to hear the profound connection that Sharon is expressing to Israel.
Sharon, I really thank you for this. This is really, it's
Just occurred
landing
to me.
crystal clear. It's just, I've had Jewish friends, but I never really had thought that particular thing through.
Yeah, yeah.
My genealogy has been done. I sent in my DNA and it's been sitting there about 3 months and I have not collected it. You have been on my case. Get it.
Yeah. I mean, and that I mean, I have had so much fun being able to trace way back into Norway, the people on all the branches.
see,
But
mine,
again, I think that profound difference is right there. That's where we belong.
and my family came for a
What Sharon
relationship.
is talking about, that's not where they belonged. That's fascinating. Go ahead, Anne.
Oh, the same as she said, my family came as a result of persecution from religion. And the first thing my ancestor did in Pennsylvania was build a little church because they had been persecuted in a part of Germany by the Lutherans, and they did not feel that they belonged there. So it is that sense of belonging. And evidently they felt, well, they didn't belong in New York East State either. Queen Anne kicked my ancestors out of New York State too because they wouldn't be Anglican. So look where I am. But
So does
it's all about that belonging and the land.
So I think I think that's an insight to reading this too for us
It is.
as we continue to.
Do you,
Go ahead, Mary Lou.
well, something that just occurred to me. Do you think that Cain, I mean, he and his line became increasingly evil because he didn't belong anymore.
Ooh,
Yeah, that could be.
Hmm.
Let's see, where is that down here?
that's an interesting angle.
Mhm.
And he didn't belong, he became separated from God.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so there's the other, I mean, I think there's the other thread is separation fragmentation, which is what disease comes from, right? That's and disease results in all sorts of aberrant behaviors. Yeah, yeah. So
Thinking,
as as we read, maybe what we can try and do is trace the that belonging, the sort of wholeness part of belonging to God. I mean, we talk a lot about that today, that we belong, we are God's beloved, we belong to God. And that when the story is a story about being fragmented, being separated from God, it results in all sorts of awful stuff. Go ahead, Avis.
yeah, I was just thinking, now maybe I'm going way too far afield, but I'm thinking about the belonging thing. And what I understand about, church demographics is the last couple of generations, many families have been sort of falling away and church membership is dropping. And now that is stopped. And the youngest generation, even there are more people coming back, but these are people who are coming back to church who do not necessarily have a recent family history of being at church. And I wonder if the rest of us need to take particular care to make sure they know that they belong, even if they're missing some of that family history.
Absolutely, Avis.
Yeah.
We have some young people at Trinity that are new, and we absolutely must. Yeah.
One of my favorite recent expressions that I've heard is belonging comes before belief.
I think that is absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah.
Being a part of, belong, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where the whole belonging, welcoming, that part, that if someone feels welcome in a community, they're more apt to at least give that community an opportunity to help them see they do belong, and then to talk about this is who we are. This is what we believe and who we are. Yeah. But when our first activity is to try and make them just like us, they'll walk out that back door faster than you can.
It does have me wondering if Mary Lou was right on that Cain's alienation from God and the community was partly the fault of the community for not welcoming him back home, like the prodigal son or something.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good statement.
Yeah.
So how do you welcome somebody like Stephen Miller back into the community?
Does that
I mean,
have
I
to
think
do
about
with
him a
repentance?
lot because his family story is not much different from my family story.
Yeah.
Was he, oh, really? I don't know anything about it.
I don't know anything about Stephen Miller.
No.
Let's learn.
His grandparents came because of pogroms. They came in the 1920s.
Does he have a Jewish
Because of a what?
background?
He is Jewish.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
He should know better.
He should. I agree.
What is Stephen Miller?
Stephen Miller is the architect of this whole horrible anti-immigration agenda
Oh, I
for the
just had a wild thought.
Republican Party.
I had a wild thought.
Stephen Miller's calling the shots.
He's calling the shots?
That's my personal opinion.
He's the one who, in the last Trump administration, when they put all those children in cages, Stephen Miller was the designer of that.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Does he come from a Pharisaical background? I'm joking.
No, no,
I
he
mean, it does
doesn't.
raise the question, how could, I mean, with that kind of background, how could he? But
So,
Yeah,
I
good
do have
question.
a-
How do we welcome him?
I don't want to move on if we shouldn't, but I did have a question.
Where?
Well, it's on page 48 and 9. Are we assuming that the age thing is metaphorical?
I'm assuming the age thing is not important.
Okay, then we'll move on. And we won't talk about the graph of the kings.
I just don't.
I couldn't read because that print was so darn small.
Yes, those
he
things.
says on the bottom
him
of
with
We'll
page,
go on to the next chapter.
But
on
Sharon,
the bottom of page 49 and that last paragraph, he answers your question.
There it is. Yep, I got it. Got it. Thank you.
yeah. Well, and what did he say about this guy who decided that? I can't remember where I read that. The Anglican Bishop James Usher decided,
Yeah.
the earth, it was
Yeah. We won't get
Created up.
bogged down there.
Sunday, October 23rd, 4004 BCE. So yeah.
Whatever.
Okay, so I'm
I
sorry.
can only think when I read these genealogies of Cab Calloway singing "It Ain't Necessarily So."
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Very good, Sharon.
So page 51. I think for me, probably one of the most important things in this is the flood story is a horrific moment in Genesis. The human experiment has failed, and apparently the only possible solution open to God at this early point in the story is to kill every creature, save for one family and a limited number of animals. Why would a loving God and master designer of the cosmos do such a thing? And he then goes on to say this is one of those stories where leaving the modern world behind is absolutely necessary. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And the question is why, not how. It seems, yeah.
I found it interesting in his next pages when he talks about the other
Stories, the other
stories that
stories, yeah.
talking about that it happened. And I guess and I don't know, it can't specifically say that there has been scientific things that found that they've found reasons to believe that there was a flood at some point, a catastrophic flood at some point. Oh yeah, he says that on page 52 about the archaeologists say that it did happen. The archaeologists say yes, this did happen, but we talk about the why, not the what.
I'm just struck by the whole story, going back to my childhood. And children have an amazing ability to accept a story as a story, just a story.
Yeah.
And so, and Jonah is the same way. It's like, as a child, it's just a story.
It has no relationship to yourself? Is that what you mean?
No, it's just a story. I mean, it's just
I can't find something.
It's like a bedtime book.
I've never had that experience.
Oh, really?
Never, ever.
And I guess I've always not been bothered by a lot of this stuff because to me, it's remained just a story.
So what do you do with the archaeological proof?
What do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Page 52. It seems there really was a catastrophic flood at some point in the ancient Near East.
Okay, what I meant is in terms of the horror of it, that
It's
God
just a
wiped
story.
out all the people.
Yeah.
You don't think about that as a kid. You just read
No.
a story.
It's a story that you heard, yeah.
Yeah.
But I might have,
Well, but then as adult readers,
Right.
we come to it completely and absolutely differently.
Yes,
And we do find some horror in the story. And I think that's the kind of stuff. What happens is that folks will just say, I'm just throwing that out, and I'm just going to throw that whole religion thing out because this makes no sense. It's not. It has, as Jane was saying, it has nothing to do with me then. So I think that's part of our challenge as adult learners and contemporary readers to listen to what the story has to say, and how that might be an important story for us to listen to. And
There's a great little book, and it's called Bible Stories for Adults, who kind of does that, kind of makes you think.
Yeah. Well, and Pete Enns does have to say something about Canaan, that what this story has to say about where they are, why does Noah curse Canaan for his father for sin? Why are Canaan's descendants doomed to be slaves? So let's get this straight on page 59. The Canaanites as a people are cursed because their ancestor, Canaan's father Ham, saw his father Noah drunk and naked. Frankly, that's an odd direction to take the story of Noah. But here's another place where we have to remember that this is part of Israel's story told from a later point of view. So what does that mean that it's told from a later point of view? They live in the land God promised. So we just heard that from Sharon over again. To Israel through Abraham. They are the people God commands the Israelites to exterminate after the Exodus. They are the people who will be a continual thorn in Israel's side until Israel's monarchy is firmly in place. And is that not what we continue to live with?
Mm-hmm.
So for people who in that time were dealing with Canaanites, this was an origin story for the Canaanites.
Yep. Wicked people, Canaan.
One thing I've never been able to figure out is why God would take a people that is already established and dump them for putting somebody else in it.
Yeah.
Which is, I look at the United States, and it's a carbon copy of the Israelites on the Canaanites.
No.
And I think, how did that ever get approved by God?
Who was the approval board on that?
It just blows me away.
Were the Canaanites really that evil?
Were they anybody's people?
I mean,
No, were they that evil? I mean, that's
evil?
the whole
You think they were
rationale.
evil, and that's why God put
Yeah,
the Israelites in there?
that's
Yeah.
what the excuse. Well, and that's also the rationale for the flood.
Right.
Say that again.
Well, that's the rationale for the flood as well. The people were evil, so God destroyed them.
Oh,
So then
And for Sodom and Gomorrah.
yeah,
okay.
destroyed.
So Sharon's question, were the Israelites really that evil, is a very good
No.
question.
No, it's the Canaanites. That's why they got booted off their land. actually
again, we come back to
destroyed as a
America.
civilization.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that is a huge question, Jane. And I don't know that, we can just explain it away that, I mean, because I can give you a really good explain it away answer.
How
Well,
can we justify it?
that it wasn't really God's instructions, it's people's warmongering. That's a human issue, not a God issue. That humans want to oppress, humans want to take over, humans want to commit genocide. It's part of what humanity does. The corrective is God in that. But
here you have God directing Joshua.
I know. So yeah.
I mean, to me, Joshua clearly was a warmonger, but
Yeah, well, so was David.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's as good as I can get. That, that these are stories written by people, and these are the places where people are writing about themselves, really and truly.
Yeah,
They're
I read
writing
sort of an
about the what?
autobiography.
They're writing about themselves,
Oh,
really,
yes.
and not about God. But I choose to think that way.
Okay. So are we gonna go ahead with chapter 7 next week?
Correct. Is that a right way to think about it? I don't know. I don't know. If I go ahead, Mary Lou.
That's my story. I'm
I'm
sticking to it.
That's exactly. If I want, yeah, exactly.
But I don't want it to be used to justify the
No.
nastiness that occurred to the American Indians
Or
by the Europeans
or
or
any
any other type of situation like that.
any population of people. Exactly.
Okay, well, I'm gonna head out. I will see you next week. Are we doing chapter 7?
Excuse me.
Yes, ma'am. Too much Norwegian coffee.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well,
7,
this is good.
it seems like a good,
huh? Or just 7?
I would say just 7
Okay.
because 8 is a long chapter and takes us in another direction.
Yeah, it's right. And that's a lot of Genesis to read too. Okay, just 7. Chapter
I'll see
7.
you. I'll see you
Genesis
tomorrow,
10
Sharon.
through 12.
I
Babylon.
want to wish everybody a happy summer. Today is the first day of summer. Hooray!
That's
Happy
right.
summer.
And the living is easy? No.
Gonna get good and hot too around here.
And Jane,
Yeah.
Jane Syme, you look particularly beautiful today.
You do.
You look
Thank
very
you.
summery,
Yes, all right. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
everyone.